Good afternoon, everybody. All right, webinar start time right on the dot. Welcome to another webinar. My name is Amanda. Today's webinar is on Goalline's advanced scheduling tools. Many of you have probably seen our webinars or training information about scheduling, and those webinars do tend to be a little bit on the kind of basic and streamlined sort of everybody uses them sort of features, but there's all kinds of features in Goalline that are really exciting and could possibly really help out the way that you manage your organization. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We'll get a little bit of the housekeeping out of the way. In the webinar, you'll notice that you don't have the ability to speak or use your microphone, but there is a chat. And so I encourage you, if you have questions throughout the webinar, please add your questions there into the chat. I'm going to try to keep an eye on them and answer anything that I can as they come up, or if I know it's going to come up later, we'll deal with it that way. And anything that maybe is still outstanding, you can either reach out to us later on through the support team or through the customer success, or check out the FAQ and help information. So we'll get started today. As I said, we're going to talk about Goalline scheduling tools. They're very configurable, and how do you know if you're getting the most out of the way that you've set up your schedule settings? So this is going to dive into some of those more advanced features, some of which may not be available to you at the moment. And if you see something that you think would be useful, you can reach out to us and we can enable certain things. By default, we're not going to see some of the features that I have highlighted in today's webinar. So we're going to cover in general terms the difference between standings and playoff style schedules and what the implications are and how you can use those to manage your league or tournament play. We're also going to talk about conferences and pools and sort of a hidden option where you can actually have a separate set of standings in addition to your conferences and pools. And I'll talk about the various reasons why that could be really useful. Then we'll talk about point values and how those are assigned and the different ways that you can customize the way you assign points to games. And then we'll look at some various schedule detail options that have an impact on how you can use scheduling tools. And then we'll just briefly talk about conflict checking and a setting that applies to practices and shared practices specifically. So first we'll dive in and we'll talk about the scheduling types. You may be familiar with the website that I'm going to be using today. Again, my Northeast Athletic Officials Association site. This is my go-to demo site. I'll hop around a little bit to a couple other sites just to show a few of the things that we're talking about here. So a standing style schedule is your typical regular season schedule. We're looking at my Winnipeg Men's Volleyball League standings here, and we can see this is a standing style schedule. It happens to be divided into conferences that are called Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. So when we talk about conferences, you can label those however you want. We'll get into that shortly. And then I actually have my overall standings down here as separated standings. So in addition to having all of my teams in their individual pools, I've also chosen that I want to see what they look like overall. And so that's what we're looking at here. This is a standing style schedule, and it's doing exactly that. It's showing us what the standings are based on how games have been reported to date on our schedule. Any schedule that is considered regular season or round robin is going to use the standings style for the schedule. Anything that uses pool play typically is also going to be a standings style schedule, though pools do apply in different ways when we get into what playoff schedules will do. And then tiebreakers are where you can apply tiebreakers to your standing style schedules to impact when teams are tied based on the point values that they have based on their wins, losses, and ties. Different tiebreakers could have a pretty significant impact on how those ties are broken. Goalline does have default tiebreakers, which is obviously going to start with points, most wins, goals for, goals against, or I should say points for, points against, because of the way that might apply to multiple sports. and then most wins against tied teams. Then you can customize that, though, using all kinds of different layers. Points are always going to be the factor in deciding whether or not there is a tie, but you can customize all kinds of things using that. Your custom tiebreaker can also be applied to ensure that the standings show the columns that you want to have displayed. Right here, we've got, this is volleyball, so we're using automatically, the goal line system is going to use the correct terminology based on your sport. So this particular one is looking at matches played, matches won, forfeit wins, forfeit losses, matches lost. We have our sets won, sets lost, points for, points against, and then the points here. So these points here are calculated based on how many points is it for a win, loss, or a tie. But these points are based on how many points were achieved during the various sets of the match. And then, of course, for volleyball, we have sets that go into a match. So there's going to be a certain number of sets won, and then there's also points associated with those sets themselves, and then we have the total points based on win, loss, or tie. I'll click over and look at just another one. This one is for hockey. So we can see a similar structure. I've only got two teams showing here, but we've again got our games played, wins, forfeit wins, loss, tie, shootout loss, forfeit loss, goals for and goals against, and then our points again. So lots of different ways you can customize what you want to show or perhaps not show. If I hop over to another one, this one's just a little bit more simple. We're just looking at games played, wins, loss, tie, points for, points against. So you don't necessarily have to show things like forfeit wins, forfeit losses, shootout wins and losses if they don't apply or if they don't matter to the way that you organize your points. So when we're talking about a standing style schedule, these are the kind that we're talking about here, either all grouped together or broken out into those conferences. When we're looking at a playoff schedule, there are different types of playoff schedules that you can do in Goal Line. That was not a playoff schedule. That is a playoff schedule. So with playoff schedules, that's the type that it can be in either a series format or a tree format. What we're looking at here is a tree format. They function exactly the same in the sense of being able to set up your different rounds and series. The main difference is that when you're using the series style, you're kind of building those entire series and rounds yourself. The bracket style is just a little bit more streamlined, and visually it's really easy for people who are looking at your website to understand exactly where are these teams going to go when we finish up the round robin or the regular season, where are they going to go in the playoff brackets, and then when they win or lose, what's going to happen to those teams after that. The bracket trees, I guess, are the typical format that we're used to seeing when we're looking at a playoff schedule, but you do have that option to select whichever is appropriate for you, and we'll take a look at the details involved shortly here. Playoffs can be seeded manually, or they can be, what I have here is it's being seeded based off of my previous standing style schedule. And I think that's a really important thing to note, that you don't have to build your playoff series knowing the teams, because of course, if you're a tournament, you don't know who's going to end up being in the playoff or finals portion of your tournament. You want to be able to structure that and say, based off of the teams I know that are participating in my regular season or my round robin, here's how I'm going to structure the playoffs. So they can be seeded manually if you don't have a round robin, if you don't have anything where they're being fed from, or if perhaps they maybe do have their own individual schedules and they're ranked kind of somewhere outside of your goal line system. You can manually select how those are going to be seeded. They can be not seeded at all as well if you want to just select random teams. If it's an 8-team tournament, that fits really nicely into an 8-team bracket. And so you could just go ahead and randomly pick the teams that are going to go in each one. Or, of course, you can base it off of a feeding schedule, which is what I've got done here. So here we've got the first place in Pool A is going to play the fourth place in Pool B. And then this one I haven't set up so we don't see what happens there. But then, of course, here we know that that it's going to be the winner of this series is going to play whoever the winner of this series is going to be. So those are some things that you can do with playoff schedules. We'll take a deeper dive into some of those settings as we look into this. But this is a really great way to take a look at your tournament and have people be able to really visualize where do the teams feed to. If we win, when will we play? Assuming you have your actual game information listed here as part of your schedule. And some other things that are really neat about playoffs is that they have their own method of using win conditions. So before I dive too much into what that means, I am going to hop over and switch from the public side and go into the back end of the site. And I'm going to go, I'm just going to stay, well, I'm probably going to go to a league menu here. Yeah, I'm going to look at my schedules here, and we'll select manage schedules. So manage schedules is where I'm going to go to add either one of these kind of schedules, and it just takes my schedule name, and then I tell the system which type it's going to be. I'll note right away that if you are only rep teams or travel teams, you won't have the option to create a playoff bracket style. You can only create playoff bracket style schedules if you have leagues of your own, where basically all of the teams are part of your league, and you're the one creating the regular season or round robin and the playoff bracket. So if you don't see the option to set a schedule as a playoff type, it means that it's a rep team that you're looking at, and it just doesn't apply. You're not going to be able to use that style of schedule. But that's the setting here that's going to determine whether or not this becomes a playoff schedule. Then I want to take a look. Oh, you know what? I don't have one in my current season yet, so I'm just going to go ahead and create one. So I'm going to say that this is going to be my playoffs, and I'm going to pick the playoff bracket style. I'm going to apply it into my women's team or my women's league here so that I can go ahead and use that with my active season there. And then we have a variety of details, and we're going to go through some of these in a little bit more detail. But the first thing that I'll point out when we're talking about a playoff schedule specifically is it's not active yet. It's not the active schedule until all of the games on my regular season schedule have been played and reported. When I have a playoff schedule that I tell the system is going to feed from my regular season schedule, I tell it that it's not active now. And as soon as all of the games on the regular season schedule have been reported, it will automatically make this the active schedule, so that when I go to the standings page, I'm going to see the playoff brackets and not the regular season schedule that's already complete at that point. So the first thing when you're creating a playoff schedule, especially when you're doing it in advance and you have a standing style feeding schedule, you just want to say no to that right away. The system's going to turn it on for you. I also like to point out that you don't actually have to publish the standings when you have a schedule. So you don't have to publish that, and that applies to any of our schedule styles. You don't have to say published, and you don't have to have the standings visible. It would basically just not show any standings whatsoever on the public side, no matter how many games have been reported. It's just not going to show you anything on those pages. So for any organization that maybe wants to use a tournament format, but you don't publish scores or standings or stats, you can still use these tools and collect and deal with that information in goal line, but not necessarily have that be public information for people to go and see the scores of various games. In this schedule right now, those are the only two things that I want to point out on this particular one. I guess the last note would be your date range always has to be accurate. So I'm just going to pick some times here. So let me see here. I can go to, sure. Hopefully that is going to fall within my season. Your schedule date range has to fall within the date range of your season. So if you ever have an issue there, it could be that your season date range isn't correct. So being a demo site, sometimes I get myself into that little bit of trouble there. So now I've created my playoff schedule, and I can see it right away over here, and I can edit this. And so we can take a deeper dive into the details, because now that Goal Line knows this is a playoff schedule, I can do some different things for how I want it to behave. Point values on a playoff style schedule are not as relevant as they are on a standing style schedule. Your point values are obviously very, very important when it comes to how you're going to calculate standings for the purposes of ranking teams. But on a playoff schedule, you're going to be basing that off of win conditions. So for the moment, we're going to skip right past all of that, and we're going to go down to the relevant schedule information section down here, where I want to say, what is the playoff type that I want to use? As I noted, there's either a series or a tree style. What we were looking at on the public side over here, over here is this is the tree style of playoffs. But if we take a look at, if I go to my women's league, I believe if I go back a couple of years, I should see if I go to the standings. The active setting I was talking about is what's making this be what I see when I land here. I don't want my playoff schedule to be the active schedule yet because we're still in the regular season here. So if I go way back in time, I'm going to see this is a playoff schedule, but it's done in series. It still creates the same function. So you're still building it in a similar way as far as picking from teams in a feeding schedule or manually seeded teams. But you can see that the display is clearly very different. And the way that this series is going to go is it's going to say round 1, series A, round 1, series B, and eventually round 2, series A and B, and however you want to name those. You do get control over what the round and series are called. So you get that same control as what you'll see when we take a look at the playoff tree format. But I wanted to take a look just to show you the difference here when we talk about a series versus a tree. That's what that's doing here. So my preference is tree. I think the tree is a really functional way of displaying your series so that you can see everything that's really kind of relevant. And you can have multiple trees within a schedule. And we'll take a look at kind of what that means. Actually, this is an example here. Or I was on an example of it. The idea of having a winner's bracket, a loser's bracket, or a championship, and that kind of thing, consolation rounds, those are generally just going to be additional trees within the same playoff schedule because you're aiming for the same result. Then I'm also going to look at how am I going to do that seeding. So I can either not seed at all, as I said, I can manually seed, or because I have two standing style schedules, I can pick from either one of my standing style schedules. So I would pick my regular season schedule, and so that's going to allow me to feed the teams based on their standings in the regular season. And it's really going to take into account things like how many teams are there. So I've got quite a few teams here, so I'd be able to pick all the way up to the 15th place team if I needed to, if that was the kind of tournament that I was going to be creating here. So I'm going to select my feeding schedule as appropriate or manually seed my teams. These are the two most important settings to make sure that you get them done right away so that when you go to build your playoff tree, you're going to be able to build it using the appropriate rankings and it's going to feed itself properly. I will note that if you start building a tree or you start building a series, you cannot make a change to that particular item. You can't change the style once you've started building it. Not the end of the world because chances are it's not published yet or active, and so you can always just delete it and start over with the appropriate style that you wanted in the first place. You should see if you want trees, what you're going to see at the very bottom here is I don't see it on this particular one. Oh, because I haven't made my selection on how I want it to work. That's why. So I'll eventually have an option to create my playoff bracket trees or set up my series. And so if it says set up series and I wanted a tree, then I know I need to go ahead and make that change right away. So those are the really key settings that are going to be in here. So I'm going to go ahead and save my change so that now I know that my schedule, oh, that is outside of my date range. Let's see here. I know that my schedule is going to work for me here. I'm just going to go to December. I think I ran into this recently with trying to do another demonstration here. Sorry about that, folks. Live webinar fun. So I'm saving that change here. It's probably going to save for me now because it's taken a little bit longer to think about it as opposed to giving me that error right away. So yeah, all right, we're good there. So now I'm going to go back to those same details and just scroll back down just to confirm tree fed from my regular season, all good there. So now when I go to the bottom, well, I guess I'm at the master menu. That's probably why. So I'm going to go back out of here and go back to manage schedules just to take a look. So we can see here, I still don't have any games on this schedule, but I do have lots of games on my regular season schedule. Obviously, some of the logistics of this, you want to make sure that you're careful with those date ranges. I'm usually just trying to pick dates that happen to work on my demo site, but obviously for you, the main considerations are when should regular season games be completed and reported, and when should the playoff games be starting. And that way you're going to be able to set up those scheduled date ranges so that you're not going to accidentally have any overlap and have your playoffs begin before your regular season is over. Because of course you might not know who the first place team is until all of your games happen to have been reported. Now that I've got that set up, I'm going to go directly now to my league control panel to the Women's Hurricane Inlet League. I want to take a look at that one specifically and kind of deal with it right in here. I'm going to go to my schedule area. So I've got my regular season schedule tools. My active schedule is always going to be the first one that we see in my season. And then I've also got a standing style schedule here. I can use the generate or conference options here. And then with my playoff, I can do my playoff tree setup here. And edit the schedule details again as needed and add games, but that's something that I would generally just do in the playoff tree setup over there. So the key here is to make sure that you have your regular season or your round robin, if you're a tournament, whatever you want to call that, the standing schedule that you're using. Make sure that that's in there. Make sure that that's the active one. And then when you create your playoff schedule, make sure you select the appropriate type and the appropriate feeding schedule. So Ron, you're asking a great question in the chat. So Ron's asking that they have multiple conferences and that they lead to the same playoff schedule. You found that the tree doesn't auto load until games from both conferences are complete. And yeah, I definitely can understand what you're looking at there. So essentially, if you have Conference A and Conference B, Conference A is done, say, before Conference B, and you know the rankings, what you're kind of looking for there is a way to push the teams to the playoff schedule that you know are there and that won't have any changes to their standings because it's only Conference B that's still playing. Absolutely understand the concern there, and that is something that I know I've brought up to our product team, because as far as playoff schedule feeding goes, what I've kind of asked for is something very similar, essentially saying, can I just push the teams that aren't possibly going to change their position in the standings? And for your example here, push Conference A. Or push all the teams that don't have. The funny thing is, the difficult part of that is that it's not necessarily push all the teams that don't have any games remaining, because there could be games remaining for other teams that would impact the other teams' positions, right? Just all based on how you do your tiebreakers and all of that kind of thing. Understand the request for sure. It is possible, though, I will note that if that's a case and it's a significant delay and you really want to get those teams in there prior to that other conference being done, the advice, and hopefully we've already given you this advice so that this isn't news to you today, but the advice is going to be to go in and edit your playoff tree, and rather than use first place Conference A, just go ahead and pick the team name that you know is already in first place Conference A, because if you know it's done, then you already know what those standings look like. But that is just a little bit of a manual intervention that I'd recommend doing there. So great question, and absolutely something that comes up just depending really a lot on how you manage your conferences, because we are going to recommend in a lot of cases that you do your conferences, one league multiple conferences so that you can have one regular season schedule that feeds into your one playoff schedule. So absolutely understand the use case there. So thanks so much for asking that question. Unfortunately, I don't have a today it's going to be perfect for you answer, but absolutely something that's on the radar. So now that we're in and taking a look at our league here, I do want to kind of describe a little bit more of what we talk about when we're talking about series and not just series versus tree, but basically the win conditions. So I'm going to go into my playoff tree setup here, and we can look over here. I can create a playoff tree for as few as 2 teams, which is essentially just one round. It's just essentially one group of teams, or I can do from 3 to 4 teams, 5 to 8 teams, or 9 to 16 teams. If you have more than 9 to 16 teams, that doesn't mean you can't use this model. It just means that you're going to use multiple trees. They all have their own labels. So maybe you have, championships for Conference A and championships for Conference B, or any combination of what you need to get done there. You can do just by using more rounds or more trees within the playoff schedule that you've created. There is a one-sided and a two-sided option for the 2 and the 3 rounds, and really they function exactly the same. It's just a preference on display. In this case, the middle game is the final. That's the championship game. If I go one-sided, then we're just going from left to right. My personal preference is left to right. That's just me, though. I really do like the left to right view of things. I find it just very easy to follow visually, and it's very easy to see where exactly are we going to. Whereas with the two-sided, you're looking at both sides and left and right, left to right on one and right to left on the other, leading to the same area. So same functionality, it's just a different view. As I said, you can change the label of this however you need to, and then you can go ahead and add your tree. So now that I've added the tree, I can edit the title of it if I want to, if I don't want it to be called championships, and then I can edit any one of these. So initially, the first thing it's going to do is just say top seed, bottom seed for all of these. I'm going to click on one, and this is going to function for any of them. I'm going to click on one right away. And we'll see what I can change in here. So the first thing I might want to change is going to be the series title. Series 1, kind of boring. So maybe I want to change that series to be called something different. Perhaps we want to call it... I don't know. So I often label my my demo site ones. I'll do, if it's going to be 1v8, I'm going to just label my series title 1v8. And in that case, what I'm going to do is select my top seed is going to be first place in regular season, and my bottom seed is going to be 8th place in regular season. So as you can see, I've got lots of teams. I've got 19 teams in my league, but only the top 8 are going to go to my playoffs in the structure that I'm going to set up. So I would create my series title as I see fit. I'm going to say, here's the top seed, which will end up being by default the home team. And then here's the bottom seed. So typically you're going to do your, first place versus last place, and then so on throughout the rest of the rounds in that, or the rest of the series in that first round. The next thing that you want to look at, and this I think is something that a lot of folks don't realize they can do within Goal Line, is create a win condition that creates a series. If you want to run a best of 7 series for your playoff, you can. So the win conditions by default is just going to ask you, and we're waiting on a quick fix after our UI update here. Unfortunately, this little box got a little squished. We're fixing that up. But what I've done here is I've said win conditions is going to be 4 wins. And I can use this drop down. It doesn't have to be wins, but 4 wins is going to give me my best of 7 series, where it could take up to 7 games to determine who's going to win this series if they have to play to a team getting 4 wins. So that's a way you can do that. If you do a best of 5 or however you want to structure that, you absolutely can. The other options in here is going to be total points or total goals. So you can go ahead with total goals within the games, or go with your points. So the total goals, that's a pretty common one for your home and away series that you'll have in a lot of soccer competitions. Wins is going to be the most typical one. And if it's just a single, you win, you move on, then you're going to go with win conditions of 1 win. So the winner of this game is going to move on to the next round, and that's it. There's no extra anything that's going to have to go into that. And then if I know already where and when this game is going to be, I can go ahead and enter the game information directly here on this screen. But if I don't know exactly where and when that's going to be, and a lot of times you don't with playoff games, especially if you have, if there's kind of benefits to being the first place team, and maybe you get a cozy time or a prime time for your first game. Maybe you don't have that information. You can always add the specific game time, date, time, and venue information later. And that's what I'm going to do here. I'm not going to create that today, but I just want to show off what we can do in here. The other thing I want to point out is because we do in a lot of cases, I guess this one doesn't, I apologize. So you can select from conference place winners too, which is going to apply to Ron's example using conference A and conference B. But we'll take a look at that in a moment here. So I'm going to save this change. I've created just my 1v8 game that is a 1 win needed to move from here. Well, what did I do? I selected the wrong thing there. There we go. There we go. The other thing I want to point out is the bye. And in my structure here, I probably wouldn't be using it because I have way more teams and I wouldn't be having a bye. But a bye is going to be particularly useful if you have a team that is just going to buy right into the second round. So maybe your first place team buys right into the second round and they don't actually have to play anybody. So what you can do is pick who's going to get the bye. So maybe it's, and I already have first place playing a game. So this probably wouldn't work in a real world, but I've got my second place team is just going to get a bye directly into the next game. And so when I save that change, it's just going to automatically go here, and we're going to and notice how second place gets a bye, and now my second round automatically has second place in regular season. So I don't have to go in and fudge it with a TBA or anything like that. I can just use the bye round to not have to use series 2 in this particular one. I see a couple of questions, so I'm just going to take a quick read there. Can you have a consolation side in the tree? Not a consolation side, but that's what you would use a second bracket for. If I am thinking of the example I was looking at earlier, maybe I don't have one to just display right away. But what I would do in that case is that I can have my consolation bracket. And with the consolation bracket, I'll add this one in here. I can take the winner or the loser from my other bracket, in addition to all the other settings that I have available. I can take the winner or the loser. So if I wanted a loser's bracket or a consolations bracket, everybody uses different words there. So I don't like the word loser, but I see it a lot on schedules. But I can go ahead and say the loser of this game gets to go and be the top seed, for example, in my consolation bracket, where they're going to play the loser of another series, or maybe they're going to play a lower ranked team that didn't make it to playoffs, or whatever it is that you have in there. So for a consolation bracket, and actually this applies directly to your bronze medal games. If you're going to have a gold medal, chances are you also have a bronze medal game. And so you might have a 1 round that you're going to have as your bronze championship, which would just be the one series here, and I would just take the loser of my series 4 loser, and whoever else, or I guess it wouldn't be series 4. That would be my series 3 loser. I would be able to select them and have them just feed directly into the bronze medal if I wanted to go ahead and call this my bronze game and have it done that way. So there's lots of different ways that you can go ahead and get those kinds of things in there. So now I've got multiple trees that I've created on here. So I've got my championship, I've got my consolation bracket, and I've got my bronze medal game. And I can select from any of those kind of options that might be useful to me in here. So the next question that I saw in here, a 2-sided where one side leads to the championship and one side leads to the consolation champion. Yeah, so I guess I think I kind of just answered that one. Unfortunately, that's not a thing that we have on Goal Line. Goal Line's trees are going to be fairly simple, and while we do have the two-sided brackets, they really just do feed in one direction, and that is towards the winner. So we don't have a way to automatically feed a consolation or anything like that. I do certainly understand the request or the question there. If that's something you do and you are, strictly you run events and that's what you do as an organization, Stack Sports does have another platform called Tournament Connect. And Tournament Connect has some very interesting playoff style schedules that are a lot more customizable than most other sports software platforms. One of the things that it doesn't do at all, though, is it doesn't take into account the ability to do any kind of round robin or pool play prior to the playoff bracketing itself. But there are customizable brackets. So if that's something you have some interest in, that would be something I would recommend. Maybe reach out and inquire as to whether or not Tournament Connect might be a platform for you for a specific tournament that you might run. You can reach out to customer success at stacksports.com, and we can look forward to getting you some additional information on that. But no, on Goal Line, the playoff brackets are going to feed in one direction only, even if they happen to be two-sided. They're always feeding to the winner. And so you would need to use multiple brackets if you need something a little bit more complex. Excuse me. So that being said, I'm going to just check back on my notes and make sure that we're still on track here and that I've gotten all that awesome information out to you. Oh, the next thing. So I find one of the really cool features that we have available is going to be our the wild card options. But before I do that, I just want to get a quick look at which one of my I don't have any conferences set up. So one of the reasons that I want to talk about Wildcard is because it's just such a really unique feature that I hadn't come across until one of our customers required it. And I thought it was just such a neat way to deal with that. So with Wildcards, what you can do is in your top and bottom seed options, you're always going to have basically every option is going to be available to you. I'm going to scroll to the bottom of my drop down, and this is just going to go ahead and list for me all of the teams that exist that I can pick from. These teams are listed as not having a conference. The next thing I can select from is going to be based on my feeding schedule, all those same teams, but what place they are, what rank they are. And then because I have multiple trees and series in my schedule right now, I can start picking from the winners and losers from any and all of the different configurations. Wild cards would apply if my regular season or my round robin schedule has conferences. What a wild card would do is, for example, if you have 4 conferences with 4 teams each, and you want the third place team from any of those conferences to be the wild card, you can select a conference ranked third place team. And so that will take a look at all 4 conferences, and then it's going to pull out, okay, here's the third place team in all 4 of these conferences, and it's going to rank those 4 teams who are all in third place in their respective conferences and pick which one is the top ranked. So it's a great way to say the third place wild card maybe gets into a playoff, whereas normally maybe the third place doesn't have room to be part of the playoffs. And so I find that to be a really interesting playoff option that allows you to kind of expand and just make your round robin schedules that much more interesting, because there's a little bit more at stake when it's like, I'm not just worried about ranking in my conference. I want to rank better than everyone else in other conferences that I don't even have an opportunity to play against. So your playoff bracket options really include any variety of selections from your feeding schedules that you could possibly require. And it's just a matter of making sure that you structure them in a way that feeds appropriately for what you're looking for. So you're going to combine things like the size of your brackets using the playoff tree creator. How big do your brackets need to be? What do you want them to be called, and how do you want them to look? And then once you have them in here, you're going to select your top and your bottom seeds based on whatever it is that you need, and you're going to set your very own win condition so that you can have something like a series, best of 7 series for each and every one of the series that are showing up in your brackets. So that I know is quite a bit of information, but really I think great information to have on playoff schedules in general. So now let's take a little bit of a closer look at conferences themselves. So Ron's already using them. I know for sure, based on some of the names I saw here today who are registered for today's webinar, that quite a few of you are using conferences now. Conferences only apply to your standing style schedules because, as we just saw, there's lots of other ways that you're going to determine how your playoffs get built. So if I want to click to manage conferences, I'm still, notice that I'm still in my league menu because most of this is going to be best completed from the league menu. I can click conferences set up right from here, or I can go into my edit schedule details, which we've seen a few times already today, and I can edit my conferences from here too. So you don't have to, if you forgot to do it, you can always just do it from here. So I'm going to click to edit my conferences. One of the things that I can do if I have old schedules in this league that had conferences is I can just copy them from a previous schedule. So you don't have to recreate all the names that you used previously. So I can do that, copy conferences. Yeah, we can go ahead and do that. So I had, pool A, pool B, very exciting. And now I can go back to my edit schedule details here. And now that I have those conferences, I can go ahead and put my teams into those conferences. And it's just a simple radio button. If you do this with a system or you already know well in advance, what they're going to be listed here as is in alphabetical order from top to bottom. And so they're not necessarily going to be in any ranked order when you're looking here. It's going to be strictly alphabetical. So you just select the appropriate radio button to represent what conference those organizations happen to be in. I'm going to go over to the demo site over here because I have set up some conferences over here, and if the organization I copied this from is on, they'll certainly recognize what I've structured here. So I've got lots of conferences and I have lots of teams, and so each one of the conferences is listed, and I've just selected the radio button for the appropriate teams to be part of those conferences. These particular conferences are not all equal sizes, and they don't have to be the same size. Should your schedule look like should this main menu look like mine? If you are a league, if you're managing a league, you should essentially see the same view as I do. I will see a few goal line admin only options that you won't see. But as far as what does it look like, it should be fairly similar. If you're having some sort of questions or you're not quite sure, absolutely reach out to the support team or our customer success email, and we can follow up with you individually and check out what's going on there. So the other thing that I want to point out in here, and this is one of the things we're going to talk about next, is this little asterisk telling us that standings reflect only games that are played between teams in the same division, which is meaning conference here. So we can have, Columbus and Evansville both have a game played. They played against each other, and that's why we see them listed here in these conferences. But there are some teams on here who have played games, but they're not showing as having played games in their individual conference rankings. And the reason for that is that if standings are only going to reflect games that are between teams in the same division or conference, then they're just not going to show up on here. They don't count. Carmel Blue has played a game. We can see that down here. They have played a game and they won their game, but the team they played was not part of their division and therefore does not count towards the standings in here at all. I have used the separated standings on this particular schedule to show what are those standings like overall. And so all teams are included in this one. So this is an overall ranking of the same standings that kind of go around here. It's just that we count all the games down here Here, we only count the games that are in the same division. If you say that this is not the case, we have a schedule detail for you to set there. I'm just going to scroll up to show you where that is. Standings only reflect games between teams in the same conference. For now, this is my different demo site. Whether this is set to yes or no is what's going to impact that. So that setting has a very direct impact on points that teams have. So when it comes to how you're ranking them and using them for playoff seeding later, those points are only going to count if the two teams that were playing against each other were in the same division, in the same conference. So that setting, and you can toggle this back and forth, and it will update accordingly on the public side of your standings when people are looking at that. So when we look over here, we can see lots of these conferences. We've got some games played here. I know that Adams has played a game, but it wasn't against someone in their own conference, so it doesn't count. I find this is particularly important for leagues that do have their conferencing and tiering, because one of the things that we strongly recommend, and actually it's not even more a recommendation so much as it is you kind of have to do it this way. If at the end of the day, and I'll go back to Ron's example, he's got Conference A and Conference B, they play off against each other. If any of your teams have to play off against each other at any point, whether it's on a standings or playoff schedule, they must belong to the same league. Because as we know in Goal Line, you can only schedule games between teams that exist within the league that you're managing. So if you need them to play against each other ever, and maybe you create your own cross conference or exhibition schedule for that purpose, or maybe they just feed into the same playoff schedule, they have to be part of the same regular season schedule. And the way that you would divide them is going to be by dividing them into tiers, or to the conferences, sorry. A lot of people will use terms like tiers, or Div 1, Div 2, Pool A, Pool B, Group 1. This particular one uses, I think, county names. I'm not really sure. And so however you want to rank them or name them is going to be up to you. But what matters is if teams from the Fort Wayne division ever get to play the Ileana division or the Michiana division, they have to be part of the same league, and they have to be divided up by conferences. When it comes to the playoff schedule part of that, you only need one playoff style schedule, but you can do something like, here's where this is going to be the overall, or maybe we only do overall, but then you could go and have in conference championships. So lots of different ways that you can handle that, but I think it's important to understand the implication between having your conferences and the schedule detail that is going to apply itself to how those conferences are going to behave when it comes to viewing the standings. So on this particular one, if I just go back to my regular season standings page here, we see this right away. If that doesn't apply to you, if all games count no matter what, then you would have your schedule detail would say no to standings only reflect games between teams in the same conference. So that's going to be just basically what we talk about with conferences. The separated standings, this is a feature that does have to be enabled. If it's not already enabled for you, you can reach out to our support team and we can get that turned on for you fairly easily. And this is going to be something where you can apply your own label. In the two examples that I've shown, I've used the word overall. But the reason that this was developed was that we have organizations where they have lots of teams from lots of different regions playing against each other, but only certain regions were actually eligible to go to their provincial playdowns. And so for that purpose, it was really difficult to see what were the standings amongst the teams that were eligible to go to these provincial playdowns. And so having our separated standings allows you to say, I want to see my conference standings. I want to see the standings based on conferences, but I also want to see specific teams called out. And if it's only a handful of teams, great. But if it's all teams, also great. You just go ahead and select whichever teams should be part of that separated list of standings. And I'll go back over here again. I've called it overall, but if I wanted this to just be a certain selection of some of these teams, I would only include the teams that are actually supposed to be involved in that particular one. If I go back to my my standings over here, I think I've got, no, I don't. have conferences on here yet. But yeah, the idea here, we'll just go back to this one. The idea being that I can call this whatever I want, and it can include up to and including all of the teams. But the use case for it was driven by that need for organizations that only send some of their teams to a state championship or provincial play down or qualifying tournament of some other type. So those are the conferences. When it comes time to schedule, you can schedule games between teams in the same conference or across conference, and the system's never going to stop you from doing that. So if I go out to my schedules here and I go and add, edit, delete games, which is how I do my one at a time adding of games. Obviously, you can upload schedule files based on the teams that you have too. Check out the help information on uploading schedules if you're not sure how to do that. But I can pick from any of my teams to be the home team and the visiting team, and it doesn't really matter what conference they're part of. I can schedule the games between them anyway. But if the standings only count, then they're just not going to count when we report it when it comes to those particular ones. So adding your games in here, easy peasy. You can do that to any team, no matter what, and it's just whether or not your schedule detail says it's actually going to count towards their standings, whether or not they become first place because they played a cross conference game. If you are using the schedule generator, conferences can have an additional value here. I'm going to just try to skip straight to the create schedule part here just to show you. There's lots. Excuse me. Sorry. There's lots that goes into the schedule generator. I mean, not super a lot. Your detail, how many games, are there blackout dates, when can they be scheduled, and then go ahead and create them. When you have conferences on your schedule, you're going to be able to say how you want the system to do the generation of your schedule for you. So if I want to generate a full schedule, I can do that, and it's not going to really care much about my conferences. If I want it to do conference specific stuff, I have my different options down here for how I want that to behave. I only have the 2 pools, so I only see one option for my cross-conference play, but if you had 4 pools, you would have multiple options in here. So I can say, I want it to just be inter-conference play, and I want you to schedule both conferences. What this is going to do is it will only schedule the games between teams that are in Group A, and then this will only give me a schedule for teams that are in Pool B. It's going to combine them into the same schedule results that I can manipulate and accept, but it's going to ensure that it's not going to schedule cross-conference games unless I select this one and say, sure, go ahead and schedule cross-conference play, and then I can be specific with which conferences are allowed to do their cross-conference play. Again, if I had 4 pools or 6 pools, I would have I would have a list here that I would be able to choose from all of the different combinations that are available for cross-conferencing. So the schedule generator does have implications when you are using conferences. So if that helps you to get your schedules done when you're getting your regular season schedules prepared at the beginning of the season, then just know that those conferences are going to help you out with that, and they're going to respect the choices that you made. And then your standings based on how you set your schedule details are also going to respect the selections that you made there. So that covers our conferences and sort of what the implications are. Now we're going to just keep hopping back into schedule details, but we're going to focus on a little bit of a different part here. So the next thing we're going to look at is various point values. So I'm going to go into my edit schedule details, and I am going to use a regular season schedule here. I'm going to actually just change my mind and go and edit my preseason because there's something else that I want to show you eventually, and I got to make a change. So I'm going to look at my standing style schedule here. In this particular case, is this the active schedule? Is no. That's because this was preseason and I've got a regular season going. So if I had preseason or spring season or whatever, maybe a tiering round schedule. There's lots of different ways I've seen folks use multiple standing style schedules within a season. so that you can kind of determine how are your conferences going to shake out. I guess that's kind of an important structural process that I see quite a bit. Is I'll see preseason, which is generally not going to be done into conferences. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, but it doesn't necessarily have to be into conferences. But when you have your preseason stuff going on, the standings at the end of your preseason could be very telling for how you want to set up the conferences within your regular season schedule. And so if you do any kind of relegation of people between conferences, and if your conferences actually represent tiers for you, those are things to consider for sure on how you might do that. So eventually, if you have more than one standing style schedule, eventually one of them is not going to be the active one. So right now I'm dealing with my inactive one. Do I want it published? All of this stuff is kind of the same details that you're probably used to going over. I am going to make a change to this one, and I'm going to say that I can share these games with other schedules in this season. I'm honestly not really up to speed on too many of the use cases for this, but it's kind of neat that we can do it. So I'm going to select this one here. The other one that we see is allowing games to be chosen for teams in another game. So that what this does is it lets you take your like a team based on the winner of another standing style game. It sounds a little bit like you're getting into playoff territory, but what it's designed to do is help do a balanced regular season or regular round robin schedule if you don't have a balanced number of teams. I know the organization that I worked with that used this the most was an organization that always had they had divisions where they would have 10 teams, and so they would use 3 pools, but of course one of those pools is going to be uneven because 10 does not divide neatly by 3. So what they're able to do is go ahead and select to say the winner of this game is going to be the team that we pick to be in this extra game that kind of needs to be played. So it's a pretty niche use case, but if that sounds like something that you've come across that you've thought, I really need a way to do this, then that could very well be the setting for you. I believe that setting should be available to all as long as you have as long as you are a sport that we have individual player stats for, which would be a lot of them, lacrosse, football, basketball, volleyball, hockey, ringette, rugby. I'm probably forgetting some, but you know who you are. Did I say soccer? I might have forgotten soccer. So that's a setting there that can be used too, but it's pretty niche as far as whether or not you would want to use it. And same thing with sharing games with other schedules. This really just beefs up standings and has more of a use case in if you do have conferences and tiers within the same league, but when you relegate. If the last place team has to go and get relegated down to another conference or moves up to another conference, if you want those games to be shared, then that's something that you would want this to be selected as yes on, so that those standings are going to count on both schedules for a team where if they played kind of preseason in this conference and second part of the season in a different conference. If you want all of those standings to count, then you're going to use the share games option. So I'm going to save that eventually, but then I'm just going to do a quick review here of the point values. Most of these are really straightforward. So regulation time, wins, losses, and ties. Nothing crazy about those. But there are a lot of times I don't necessarily see differences in people's point values or even an assigned value to overtime, win, loss, and tie. There is a big implication to not assigning a value to overtime, wins, losses, and ties. If you don't provide a value for it, then you can't report a game as having ended in overtime. So if you do overtime, it is important to have your overtime, win, loss, and tie values set here correctly so that you can appropriately record the fact that the game ended in overtime. Shootout wins and losses. These are things where if you are doing if you have goalies in your sport, you're able to, I'm thinking about there's going to be one below. shutout. That's what a shootout win. Okay, sorry. Shootout wins are exactly that. So shootout wins and losses. Usually what I see is that they're going to have the same values as your overtime win and loss, so that you end up with the same points, whether you lost in a shootout or you lost in overtime, you still generally will get a point. Whereas if you lose in regulation, you don't get any points. So those are things that if you don't indicate that there's a point value for them here, then you will not be able to report that it ended in overtime or that it ended in a shootout later on. So very important to have that in there. Your forfeit win and loss value, same idea. You do want to make sure that you're including that if you do in fact use forfeits, but you can disable forfeit wins and losses here. If you just don't use those at all, you don't have to necessarily. And if you don't use them, then they don't have to show up kind of anywhere in your standings. Your custom tiebreaker can prevent forfeit references to be shown in your standings anyway. I generally recommend, if you do forfeits, include the forfeit loss column, because forfeit win column, because it may come with a different amount of points. If you assign a score to the team that wins in a forfeit, then you can enter that here. I know back in the day when I was playing soccer as a teenager, it used to be a team that forfeited. The team that won a forfeit always won 3-0 against the other team. And so that's something that you can easily set up in here. But if you don't assign a point value, you don't have to do that. So that it's not necessarily that they get any goals. Then we have some of the more advanced things here that I don't see in a huge amount of organizations, but they certainly do have their value depending on your structure and your time constraints in your various venues. Points per win, per period win, loss, or tie can also be added in. So points per period loss or tie is something, or sorry, win or tie is something that I have seen on numerous schedules. Points per period loss, generally not though. But these just, they do exactly what they say. If I won the first period because it was 1-0 at the end of the first, I'm going to get my single point for that. But if I only won that one period and I lost the rest of the game, then I'm only going to get this 1 point for the whole thing. So you can set these up. There is the caveat of you absolutely have to be tracking individual player statistics in order for this to work. And the reason for that is we don't know what the end of the score, the period score was, unless you indicated it. I'll also point out this as period because I'm looking at a hockey league schedule. But if I was in soccer or inning or baseball, I would be seeing halves or innings. So that terminology would be appropriate based on your sport. So points per period, win, loss, or tie is something you can do. We also have fair play options, and this is something that I think is a little known feature on Goal Line. Fair play options can be either done as standings, where you actually get points for being the team that is awarded the fair play, or it could just be a display factor to show how many points you have as fair play. And then you can indicate what is the fair play bonus value. So if I have a fair play bonus value of, say, 0.5, and I'm the fair play winner, and it is for standings, then what that's going to do is it's going to actually add 0.5 to my points as a team. That impacts my place in the standings. If I say that it's display only, it will still display in a column in the standings, but it's not going to impact my overall points for the purpose of where I actually rank in the standings. The fair play mercy rule is a little bit different, and I find much more widely used, particularly in recreational organizations. The fair play mercy rule says if I set this at, I frequently see it somewhere between like 7 and 10. I'll just go ahead and call it 10. So the fair play mercy rule here is saying that if a team is winning by more than 10 goals or points, whatever your sport dictates, that after that 10th point differential, they don't count anymore when it comes to the team's goals for or goals against. They do still count for the individual players who scored them, and they still count as goals for the goalies who let them in. But they don't count towards your team's overall goals for and against, and the kind of averages and various calculations that might be using those values. So the purpose of this is to say if you're already winning by 10, Why keep scoring? Just, it's a mercy rule. It's so that the team's not going to lose by that wide of a margin. If the score ends up being, say, 11-5, the mercy rule doesn't come in yet, because the differential has to be 10. I could be winning 15-5 and I get all 15 of my goals. But as soon as I score a 16th goal and they still only have 5, I don't get that 16th goal to count towards my team statistics. This is used quite often. I've seen it as low as like 5 goals as well, just depending on the age and the recreational or competitive category that you are. You're going to select whatever makes the most sense for you. It makes it so that teams just don't want to keep running up the score. And then I almost talked about this earlier when I wasn't supposed to. The shutout bonus is a point that you can award. So it's just a yes or no, and it's either going to add a point or not if the team won with a shutout. This only applies to teams that use goalies. So I think in goal line, that's really only going to apply to soccer, hockey, and lacrosse. I could be wrong about that, but those are the kind of main sports that would be using that. I guess field hockey too. We've got anything that's a variation on those. If you've got a goalie and you track goalie stats, that would be available to you. The other thing that will happen based on some of these important settings above is if you say that it goes, if you want to say that it goes to overtime, how many overtime periods might you have? And again, this goes into how can you report it? If we go to an unlimited number of overtime periods, then maybe you want to have this, listed as, 30. I don't think there's a way to say unlimited in here. It does have to have a value. You can't say 0. You can't have it blank. It does have to be either 0 or some number. And then if the duration is different, so we have 3 periods of 15 minutes each, but say we go and we do 1 period of overtime, but that overtime is only 5 minutes. This is how I would indicate that. And then if we still don't have a winner, then the goal line system is now going to assume you're going to shoot out because we have a shootout win-loss value. If we did not have a shootout win-loss value, we play 1 overtime period. If it's still tied, we assume it's allowed to end in a tie. So if you do play multiple overtime periods, just be sure that you've got that appropriately added to your schedule details. So those are the fair play, or sort of the point values that I wanted to talk about. So I just want to run through and make sure that I've got everything on there covered. So we talked about sharing games, custom point values, points per period, standings implications for your fair play points and your conference choice options. So the last thing I guess I'll do is show you. There is another feature that lets you do a point value that is specific to a specific game. I don't really see this used very often. I think sometimes people do use it because they have interesting rules when it comes to forfeits and overtimes, and that different point values might be assessed for different reasons. And it's also a useful tool if you want to make sure that overtime wins and losses and things are recorded appropriately, but you're not necessarily doing individual stats and that kind of thing. So if normally a win is 2 points, but you want to say this particular win is going to be 3 points, you have the freedom to do that. And it applies only to the one single game that you're creating or editing in the system. That is something that does have to be turned on by your support team. So if you don't see that and you think it would be useful, reach out to us and let us know. I'm not familiar with too many leagues or at least youth sport organizations nowadays that would have something like this in their kind of competition rules. But if that does sound like something you would take advantage of, let us know. The very last thing I'll cover, and then I swear I'm going to be done, is I'm going to talk about practice schedules. So as you know, goal line is going to always do a conflict check. Every time you're creating a game in the system, it's going to check the venues and the teams to make sure that there is no conflict with anything overlapping there. And as you probably also know, depending on if you're a league or an association here, maybe you don't, but I guess the other thing to keep in mind is that practices can be either full venue, I want to say full ice or full field, but full venue, one team per venue for a practice, or half venue, which means we can do 2 teams per venue per practice, or they can be shared, which allows you to essentially create any number of like you can have one practice with any number of teams. So when you're using the shared practice option, it is still going to check your conflicts, but it's going to recognize staggered start and end times as being a conflict. And so we don't always want that. And what I'm kind of referring to, and my son's organization here in Nova Scotia does this pretty regularly, where one ice surface is going to have 2 teams scheduled to practice. My son's going to start at 6 and go till 7, but then another team is going to go from 6:30 to 7:30 on the same technically it's the same time slot, but then when we're done at 7, another team is going to come in and be part of that 7 to 8 p.m. practice, and so on. If you use practice structures like that, where you have shared practices across multiple teams, you can turn off the shared practice conflict checker you can just say no. So what this will do is it will say it's not going to be a conflict if you try to say, team A is already practicing at that venue at 6 o'clock, so you can't schedule team B to practice at 7:30 at that same venue, even though you've said it's shared. So this is an important implication when it comes to scheduling your practices, and that may be something that comes into play, especially if you work out your schedules offline and upload them using a CSV file. It would be a pain if you went to upload that and it considered all of those shared practices to be in conflict after the first one gets added in there. So I like to point that out as kind of a bit of an advanced feature for organizations that typically I see that with large organizations with a large number of teams at facilities that have to share a lot of their ice time or field time or court time or whatever it is that you use as a sport. So that covers today's webinar. I think I got everything covered there, and I only went over by 8 minutes this time, which is better than I've been doing. I do have some time to stick around for some questions if there's any additional questions or anything else you'd like to take a quick look at. But as you know as well, this recording or this webinar will be sent to you as a recording that you can replay. You'll be able to share that with anybody from your organization that wasn't able to attend today. And I've also updated, just for everyone's information, our webinars link here. If you go to the FAQ or in your login area, if you click on webinars, you're going to be brought to the same webinar page as usual, but we finally got it updated with all of our webinar series that we've been doing since the summer of this year. And you can register to watch any of the past webinars that maybe you haven't seen in the past. So if you missed out on our original scheduling webinar and today has made you very curious, go ahead and register, and you'll be able to watch that right away on a live replay. Well, thanks for coming, Scott. You could have probably taught a little bit of this webinar. All right. Thanks so much to you guys for coming. I really appreciate you spending an hour with me here. If you do have any further questions, then you know how to reach us, and have a great night. Thanks so much for joining. Oh, sorry. Just saw your message there, Scott. I'm not leaving yet. Like the playoff tree, Premier League is only top teams advancing. Yeah, especially if your playoffs are fairly simple, absolutely, the playoff bracket tree look is going to really fit your organization. As I find it, especially if there's less than 16 teams, you're going to be golden one way or the other. So yeah, the playoff tree is definitely a great look to your playoff brackets. All right, well, thanks so much, guys. Really appreciate it. Have a wonderful day.